You've been doing the work, visualizing, meditating, aligning with your higher self, and then it happens. That moment. That flicker of something unmistakably real. You feel it in your chest before your mind even catches up. A shift, a knowing. It doesn't scream, it hums quietly like a tuning fork being struck inside your soul. You realize, for the first time in a long time, that you're not chasing your future. You've touched it. There's this warmth, this inner alignment that doesn't need proof. You just know something in you has changed. But before you can even celebrate that alignment, something else creeps in, subtle at first. A tightening in your gut, a flicker of doubt, a memory disguised as logic. You try to ignore it, but it grows louder. And then fear makes its entrance, not in the dramatic way we imagine, but in small, clever whispers. What if it doesn't last? What if it's not real? What if you can't hold it? The fear doesn't care about the work you've done, or how inspired you felt yesterday. It wants to measure this new alignment against old evidence. And when it doesn't find a familiar reference point, it calls that unfamiliarity a threat. And this is where people get lost, not because they aren't ready to change, but because they don't realize how fear disguises itself when you're evolving. You thought fear would show up when you were stuck, but it often shows up when you're shifting, right after the breakthrough, right after the clarity, right when you feel closest to the life you've been trying to live. That's when fear gets loud. That's when the mind scrambles for control. And that's when your biology, the system trained for survival, not expansion, goes into alert mode. Your body doesn't yet know that this new version of you is safe, so it tenses, it resists, not because you're failing, but because you're stepping beyond the data your nervous system has been relying on. Your system isn't resisting the goal, it's resisting the unfamiliar. That's how powerful you are. Your shift was felt so deeply that your old identity is fighting to survive. This isn't the part to run from. This is the part to recognize. The fear you feel right after your alignment isn't wrong. It's not a sign you've gone backward. It's the tension of transformation, the friction of new frequencies rubbing up against outdated patterns. It's like spiritual tectonic plates shifting inside you. And just like the earth needs pressure to form mountains, you need this internal resistance to reveal your new shape. Most people misunderstand this phase. They think the fear is a message to stop, to retreat, to wait for a calmer day. But the truth is, fear is just a side effect of growth happening faster than the ego can explain. It's your cue to breathe deeper, not to run. So instead of seeing fear as failure, start seeing it as a signpost. You're close. The fact that fear showed up doesn't mean you lost the signal. It means your system registered the signal, and now it's calibrating to hold it. But here's the part no one tells you. This calibration doesn't happen in the mind. It happens in the body. That's why fear feels physical. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your thoughts get louder. But none of that means you're broken. It means you're becoming. Think of it like this. When you plant a new frequency inside your field, through a decision, a vision, a breakthrough, the old patterns don't vanish. They come to the surface, desperate for certainty, scanning for the old script. But there isn't one anymore. You're rewriting it. And in that gap between the old software and the new signal, your nervous system starts asking, are we safe here? Are we really allowed to feel this free, this powerful, this seen? The discomfort is the question, but your breath is the answer. Your job in that moment isn't to be perfect. It's to remain present. Not to eliminate the fear, but to witness it without identifying with it. Because the moment you stop trying to run from the fear and start recognizing it as part of the shift, you stop being a victim of your transformation and start becoming its leader. And that changes everything. Let's go deeper, because this fear isn't random. It's biological. Your body is designed to protect you. It keeps you in the familiar, not because the familiar is good, but because it's known. Known equals safe to the subconscious. So every time you step outside your known patterns, even if you're stepping into joy, abundance, freedom, your survival system raises a flag. And this is where most people misinterpret the signal. They assume fear equals danger, but in the realm of quantum alignment, fear often equals expansion. The stronger the pull into your next level, the louder the alert system gets. Not because something's wrong, but because something's working. Your body is not the enemy here, it's the instrument. And every instrument needs tuning. So when fear arises in the middle of your shift, remember, this isn't sabotage, it's signal. You are disrupting an old pattern with the frequency of your future. And disruption is what evolution feels like. The fear you feel is not a wall, it's a threshold. The old self is losing its grip. And the new self, it's not asking for your perfection. It's asking for your presence. You think you've lost it, the alignment, the flow, that feeling you had just days or hours ago when everything made sense, when your body felt light and your vision clear. Now you're spiraling, overthinking, doubting. The same affirmations don't hit the same. Your body doesn't respond the way it did before, and quietly you wonder, was it all an illusion? Did I just imagine the shift? Am I back to square one? But what if I told you that you're not misaligned at all? What if the discomfort you're feeling right now is not the absence of alignment, but the weight of recalibration? The truth is, alignment doesn't disappear, it gets interrupted. An interruption isn't failure, it's friction. Alignment is a living energy, not a mood. It's a signal you tune into, not an emotional state you chase. You don't lose it because you had a bad day or an anxious thought. You don't fall out of alignment just because fear came up. In fact, if you look closely, that fear is often the byproduct of you getting closer to your desired frequency, not further from it. But the moment fear interrupts the flow, most people panic. They think the whole process is broken, that they've taken a step backward. But the quantum field doesn't operate in steps. It operates in signals. Your frequency didn't drop just because your nervous system flinched. It wobbled, that's all. And a wobble is not the same as a collapse. Here's the part most people miss. Fear doesn't contradict alignment. It reveals the edges of it. It shows you the places where your signal hasn't yet stabilized. Think of it like tuning into a radio station. You get the channel, but there's still static. That doesn't mean the station is gone. It just means you're not fully locked in yet. And the static, that interference, is information. It tells you exactly where to look, where the old code is still active, where the subconscious is still uncertain. That's not misalignment, that's data. The field isn't punishing you for being afraid. It's inviting you to regulate in the face of that fear so your signal can become stronger. And here's the paradox. The more powerful the life you're aligning with, the more likely it is that fear will surface as part of the integration. Not because you're off track, but because you're disrupting deeply rooted patterns that have kept you in energetic survival. You're shifting gravitational centers, and your system wants to pull you back, not out of malice, but out of muscle memory. That's why the fear feels so convincing, because it's familiar, and in the absence of evidence for your new identity, your nervous system reaches for the only reference points it has, the past. It's not misalignment. It's an outdated algorithm running until you overwrite it with presence. So what do you do when fear shows up and everything in you wants to label it as failure? You pause, you breathe. You remember, this is not regression, it's recalibration. The fear is not proof that your manifestation is broken. It's proof that your manifestation is real, because real change will always agitate the systems you built to survive stagnation. Your job isn't to get rid of the fear, it's to learn its language, to stop asking, why is this happening again? And start asking, what is this showing me about what's next? And here's where the game changes. When you stop trying to eliminate fear and start making it familiar. Most people try to escape fear, they spiritualize it away. They slap a positive affirmation on it, they run from it in the name of alignment. But here's the truth, what you run from runs you. What you welcome, you transform. The only reason fear feels like a threat is because you've been taught that presence only counts when it feels good. But real alignment, the kind that creates sustainable shifts, isn't built in ease, it's built in witnessing. When fear comes in, you don't exile it. You get curious. You listen, not to let it take the wheel, but to understand why it's screaming from the passenger seat. Because more often than not, fear doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be seen. And when it's seen, it softens, not all at once, not dramatically, but subtly, steadily, consistently. And that consistency, that's where true energetic coherence is born. So instead of fearing the fear, make space for it. Expect it. Understand that every time you enter a new frequency, one that your nervous system hasn't stabilized in before, fear will knock. It's not asking to destroy your shift. It's asking, can I come too? This isn't about making fear your leader. It's about making it your messenger. Let it show you where the old codes are still looping. Let it reveal where you're still holding tension, where you're still doubting, where you're still contracting, because those are the precise places where alignment is trying to take root. This is the invitation. Not to fake calm, but to build fluency with your own fear, to stop seeing it as a stop sign and start treating it like a compass. And once you shift that perception, everything opens. You no longer need to perform your way into alignment. You become the field, the transmitter, the presence that allows all parts of you to exist without distortion. And in that wholeness, your signal sharpens, your timeline stabilizes, and fear no longer pulls you backward. It becomes the proof that you're moving forward. There will come a moment, maybe in the middle of a conversation, maybe in silence, maybe while doing something completely mundane, when your body flinches. Something unexpected triggers it. Maybe it's a comment, a memory, a delay in results. And suddenly your chest gets tight, your thoughts start spiraling, your breath becomes shallow, you feel it happening, the contraction, the pull back into the familiar. Not because the familiar is right, but because it's known. And when that happens, the part of you that used to disappear, that used to give up or overthink or freeze, starts speaking. Loudly. It'll sound like, this isn't working, you've lost it, you're slipping. And in that moment, your nervous system starts doing exactly what it's been trained to do, protect you by pulling you back to what it understands. But the truth is, that flinch isn't a failure, it's a crossroads. It's an invitation into the most important skill of all, how to hold the frequency through the flinch. Because this is the real edge, not when you're visualizing and everything feels aligned, not when your meditations are deep and your intentions are clear, but right here, when your body is reacting, when your past is knocking, when your nervous system is screaming for the old pattern. This is the moment that defines whether you embody the new reality or abandon it. And the key is not about becoming fearless. It's about becoming fluent. You have to learn to recognize the early signals, the subtle cues your body gives before your mind even catches up. That flutter in your chest, that jaw tension, that rush of heat. These aren't problems, they're portals. They tell you where your system still holds a memory of lack, of fear, of powerlessness, and you don't override that. You don't force it away. You meet it with presence. This is where breath becomes sacred. Not a performance, not a trick, but a literal bridge between your nervous system and your quantum self. When the flinch happens, your job is not to fix it. It's to breathe with it, to acknowledge it, to stay. Staying doesn't mean standing still. It means not abandoning your signal just because it got shaky. It means choosing coherence even when clarity feels out of reach. Because coherence is not perfection. It's consistency. And consistency is built in moments like these, when your old identity is throwing everything it has at you, and you still choose to remain. You still choose to soften. You still choose to breathe deeper instead of spiraling lower. This is the practice, holding the frequency not by pretending to be calm, but by knowing how to recalibrate when you're not. It means watching the fear rise, and instead of identifying with it, you become the witness. You speak to yourself with compassion, not urgency. You don't say, "What's wrong with me?" You say, "Of course this fear is here. I'm stretching beyond what I've known. I'm entering a reality my body hasn't normalized yet." That shift in inner dialogue changes the chemistry of the moment. You become the space where fear can move without taking over. And in doing that, you create something most people never reach: safety inside expansion. Because the truth is, quantum flow isn't sustained by vision boards or high vibes alone. It's sustained by your ability to regulate your nervous system in real time. When life throws contrast at you, when emotions swell unexpectedly, when a familiar trigger appears out of nowhere, your expansion doesn't end. It's tested. Not to punish you, but to see if your nervous system has caught up with your new identity. Most people want to manifest change without changing the way they respond to discomfort. But your response to discomfort is the manifestation. The leap doesn't happen when you get the thing. It happens when you stop abandoning yourself every time discomfort arises. And this is what most people misunderstand about regulation. They think it's about control, about staying in a perfect state at all times. But real regulation is not about being composed. It's about being conscious. You can be shaking and still be regulated. You can be scared and still be aligned. Because regulation is about awareness, not emotional perfection. It's the moment when you notice your breath is shallow and you choose to deepen it. When your thoughts are spiraling and you gently return to the now. When your energy is scattering and you pull it back, not forcefully, but lovingly. That's the edge. That's the real mastery. It's easy to feel aligned when things are flowing, but quantum alignment becomes real when things wobble and you stay with it anyway. When the frequency you've chosen becomes more familiar than the fear you used to follow. That shift doesn't happen through intensity. It happens through repetition, through practice, through devotion to your chosen signal. And that devotion gets built right here, in the messy, inconvenient moments when your body wants to close but your awareness chooses to remain open. You don't regulate once, you regulate constantly, not because something's wrong with you, but because you're creating a new energetic baseline. Every time you notice the contraction and respond with softness, every time you breathe instead of brace, every time you choose to stay instead of escape, you train your body to feel safe inside your expansion. And once your body feels safe, the quantum responds differently. The universe stops waiting to see if you're serious and begins organizing around your steadiness. This is the moment where the leap becomes real. Not when you feel fearless, but when you know how to hold yourself inside fear. When you can tell your nervous system, I know you're scared, but we are not in danger. We are just evolving. You place your hand on your chest, you breathe, you anchor, and in that moment you shift timelines, not by force, but by frequency, not because you fixed the fear, but because you stopped being afraid of feeling it. That is coherence, that is quantum flow, and that is the beginning of a new kind of power. One rooted not in escaping fear, but in knowing how to walk through it without ever letting go of your signal. There's a moment in the shift when it's no longer about visualizing your future or repeating your affirmations. It becomes about what you do with the parts of yourself that panic. The small, scared pieces that rise up just when you're on the edge of embodiment. These parts are not enemies. They're not obstacles. They are fragments of your identity that were created during seasons when you didn't have the luxury of expansion, when your nervous system had to prioritize survival over sovereignty. They are old protectors, trained in environments of lack, built to scan for danger, wired to tighten in the presence of too much love, too much peace, too much possibility. So when you start to step into the field of your quantum self, when you begin to live your shift instead of just dream about it, those parts flare up. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because those unintegrated pieces have never experienced this version of reality. They don't recognize safety yet. And this is where the real integration begins. You see, embodiment isn't just about amplifying your light. It's about making space for the shadow that shows up when you do. The younger parts of you that learn to please, to hide, to perform, to shrink. Those are not just patterns. They're people inside you, emotional archetypes frozen in time. And the moment you stop trying to bypass them and start listening, everything changes. Because these parts don't need to be healed through force. They need to be witnessed. The fear, the jealousy, the anger, the panic. It's not coming from the quantum self. It's coming from the parts that were never taught what it means to feel safe inside expansion. And when you ignore them, they fight louder. But when you welcome them, they begin to trust you. And that trust is the foundation of coherence. This is not about abandoning the shadow so you can become your highest self. It's about inviting the shadow into your highest self. Saying to those younger, hurting parts, I see you. You don't have to protect me anymore. I've got this. And in doing that, you collapse the internal war. You stop leaking energy trying to silence your pain. And that unification, that inner coherence is what the quantum field responds to. Because the field doesn't reward performance. It responds to wholeness. It responds to clarity. And clarity doesn't come from perfection. It comes from integration. When you hold the scared part of yourself with the same energy you hold your desires, You create something rare, a frequency that is both soft and strong, a signal that says, I don't need to eliminate anything to evolve, I just need to include it. That kind of self-leadership is magnetic. That's what stabilizes your timeline. Because now you're not manifesting from fragmentation, you're manifesting from unity. And unity doesn't wobble, unity doesn't collapse under pressure, unity doesn't need constant reassurance from the external world. It becomes the field, and then something subtle begins to happen. As you start integrating these pieces, not as enemies but as old allies, you realize they were never trying to sabotage you. They were trying to belong. These parts weren't working against your future. They just didn't know they were invited into it. When you shift from controlling your triggers to curiously decoding them, the panic starts to feel different. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops controlling your trajectory. It becomes an echo rather than a command, a gentle reminder of where you used to live, not a directive to go back there. This is the real magic of inner work, when the scared child inside you starts to feel safe inside your expansion. When the patterns that once pulled you into collapse now pull you into compassion, when your trauma stops being the driver and becomes the teacher, you are not just stepping into a new identity, you are building a sanctuary within yourself that is strong enough to hold all of you. And when you do that, your signal stabilizes, because you're not chasing alignment anymore. You are the alignment. You are the home that your energy has been looking for. This is the moment the field begins to listen differently. Because the quantum doesn't respond to declarations, it responds to consistency. And consistency doesn't mean you never feel doubt or fear. It means when those emotions arise, you don't abandon yourself. You don't spiral, you anchor. You become the safe container for your own shift. And that internal coherence, that ability to stay rooted when the signal wobbles, is what creates external evidence. Not because you forced the outcome, but because your energy became undeniable. When your presence becomes steady, when it no longer fractures every time discomfort shows up, you begin to notice something else. Your reality responds faster. People shift around you. Opportunities arrive not because you chased them, but because your frequency became stable enough to receive them. This is the moment where your timeline stops being a theory and starts becoming your lived experience. Not because you mastered the universe, but because you mastered the art of being with yourself inside uncertainty. That is what makes your energy trustworthy. Not your ability to stay high vibe, but your ability to stay present with whatever arises without collapsing. That's what builds momentum. That's what creates flow. Not pushing harder, not thinking more positively, but becoming the person who can hold the signal of their future self even when their past self is screaming for attention. And when you become that person, the quantum field has no choice but to organize around you, because it recognizes the signal of someone who is no longer waiting to be rescued from fear, but who is building a new reality through it. You start to realize the power was never in the vision. It was in your capacity to hold it, not just when it's convenient, not just when it's quiet, but when life gets loud, when fear shows up uninvited, when doubt taps you on the shoulder while you're trying to stay in flow. There's a turning point in every transformation where the energy shifts from reaching to anchoring, where it's no longer about glimpses of your future self. It's about becoming the frequency that can hold it all, the expansion and the contraction, the faith and the fear, the clarity and the confusion. You stop needing perfect conditions to feel aligned. You stop needing external signs to validate your path. You become the anchor, not because you've mastered the quantum, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself when the winds of resistance blow through. That's when everything changes. Because now, you're no longer riding the emotional roller coaster of reactivity. You're not manifesting based on how your day went or how well your morning meditation landed. You're tuned into a deeper current, a quieter intelligence, one that doesn't panic when old thoughts resurface, one that doesn't collapse when the world doesn't respond immediately. Because here's the truth that most people don't tell you. Alignment isn't about constantly feeling good. It's about not losing yourself when you don't. That's the anchor. The moment you realize that emotional storms are not signs you're failing, they're opportunities to deepen your regulation, to show yourself you can be trusted with this shift, that you can hold it even here. And the deeper truth is, life is always going to test your frequency, not because the universe is cruel, but because it responds to coherence. It's easy to hold your vision when nothing's pushing back. But what happens when something goes wrong? When the text doesn't come? When the client backs out? When the fear whispers, "See, you were foolish to believe it could be different"? That's the moment of leadership. Not leadership over others. Leadership over your signal, over your reaction, over the energy you choose to embody, even when old emotions scream for attention. And this is where your nervous system evolves. Because when you hold the signal through the storm, something extraordinary happens. Your body stops fearing expansion. It starts to recognize it as safe. It begins to trust you. And when your body trusts you, the field does too. You become the anchor by repetition, not perfection. You become trustworthy to the quantum, not by never wavering, but by learning how to return, again and again, with breath, with awareness, with love. And when you become the kind of person who knows how to return to your signal, no matter what, you build momentum, not fast, not flashy, but sustainable. And that's the difference between those who temporarily shift and those who transform for life. The temporary shifters chase the feeling. The transformers become the field. They stabilize their energy. They stay when it's hard. They regulate when it's loud. They soften when it would be easier to contract. And that softness isn't weakness, it's power. Because nothing is more magnetic than a person who doesn't need the world to behave in order to stay in alignment. And this leads to the final realization. Not dramatic, but deeply rooted. You don't need to push anymore. You don't need to chase. The version of you that you've been working so hard to meet is not waiting somewhere far away. They're already here, already humming underneath your thoughts, already present in your breath, already encoded in the stillness beneath the noise. You don't access that version by doing more. You access them by becoming still enough to feel them, to recognize that alignment is not something you perform, it's something you practice. And that practice doesn't have to be graceful, it just has to be real. So when fear shows up tomorrow, or an hour from now, you won't be surprised. You won't make it mean you're doing something wrong. You'll breathe deeper. You'll say, here we are again. You'll place a hand on your heart, ground your energy, and remember, I am the anchor. I am the field. I am not here to wait for safety. I am here to be the safety. And in that energy, you stabilize timelines. You create coherence where there was once only chaos. You stop negotiating with your power and begin living it without apology. This is how you become trustworthy, not just to others, not just to the universe, but to yourself. You begin to notice the subtle shifts, how your breath doesn't tighten as fast, how your thoughts move slower, more gently, how you're able to feel the contraction without building a whole story around it. You start to feel the spaciousness inside discomfort. You start to move through doubt with curiosity instead of urgency, and that's when it hits you. The shift is not something coming, it's something you're already living, quietly, consistently, devotedly. Because the real leap was never about achieving more. It was about becoming someone who doesn't lose their alignment just because emotions flare, someone who doesn't collapse their vision just because a wave of fear rolls in. The real leap is when you embody presence even in the tremble. When you become the safe space your inner world can return to, again and again. That is what the quantum recognizes. Not your goals, not your affirmations, but your frequency, the one that says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not abandoning myself. I'm not backing down from expansion just because fear knocked. I stay, I breathe, I lead. And so now the question isn't when will I arrive? The question becomes, how deeply am I willing to hold myself while I get there? Because that's the signal, that's the embodiment, that's the transformation the universe responds to. Not force, not performance, not chasing, but coherence, integrity, presence. The kind of presence that stays open, stays soft, stays true, no matter what. And when you live from that space, life doesn't just respond, it aligns. Because you're not waiting for the shift, you are the shift.